So yesterday we talked about how some factors are better at predicting the future when you use time series data, and other factors are better when you use cross-sectional data. Today I want to think about why that's the case. All right, for me, I think the best way to start is to think about what is changing, okay, or what the differences are. So if you think about valuation factors, there's two components to the valuation factor. There's earnings and there's the pricing data, okay? So if you think about, like, in which cases are those comparisons the most reasonable? So here I think, well, think about cross-sectionally. The pricing data is all current, so it seems very comparable. And the fundamental data is very idiosyncratic for the companies. It also seems very comparable. Now, what if we go and look at time series data? Now, we still have this fundamental component, which seems very idiosyncratic in nature. It's due to the company's line of business. There is, I would argue, some component there that reflects the market cycle. There are companies, that earnings rise and fall more over the market cycle. There are companies where it rises and falls less. But if you think about the pricing component, that has an extremely large systematic component to it, okay? If you think about prices at the height of the internet bubble, you think about prices at the trough of the financial crisis, all companies were affected by this. So I would argue in a time series format, the pricing data is changing more in a time series than the fundamental component, which is more idiosyncratic, making the comparisons over a time series more difficult. Now, it does seem interesting to say, hey, company XYZ is really cheap compared to its norm or compared to its average now, or really expensive compared to its average. But because of this systematic component, it makes this analysis very difficult. And I've tried to do things of this nature and have not been successful at using fundamental data in a time series way, although it does seem to work cross-sectionally. All right, now, so we take the same analysis and we look at momentum factors, where we said, hey, for momentum, it seems to work better in the time series than it does cross-sectionally. The thing here is, we're talking about momentum factors. The only factor we're thinking about is price, okay? So we don't have this systematic, idiosyncratic disconnect like we did when we have factors with two components, one where it is fundamental and one where it's pricing, one where it's more systematic in nature, one where it's more idiosyncratic in nature. So that kind of explains, why we have factors that work in the time series. Now, another way to think about this is think about the relationship between the cross-section and the time series. We could argue that the time series is really kind of equal to the cross-section plus this systematic factor. All right. So when would this systematic factor improve the cross-sectional information? That's when there's a trend, right? So if we're looking at trends and the systematic factor, kind of the market movement, is also in that same trend, it's going to expand this cross-sectional information, which means kind of that the time series works better. That's the case with momentum. And when would it kind of counteract this signal? So you think about valuation cross-sections, it's really it's a reversion to the mean. So we're looking for kind of counter trend signals. And the systematic factor is kind of a trendy signal. So it kind of counteracts the signal we're getting from the cross-section. That's just another way to think about this. All right, so one thing you might ask yourself is, can we make adjustments to improve the performance when there's a type of data that doesn't work? So for example, we say, if we use time series data with fundamental ratios, it doesn't seem to work. Could we make an adjustment here? Now, I have read research that suggests using both cross-sectional and time series data to a fundamental ratio is better than just the cross-sectional data. I would argue that you have to make kind of that systematic adjustment to your time series data in order for this to be true. I highly encourage you to look into that yourself and see if that is in fact the case. See if you can, in fact, create a super factor of cross-sectional time series super factors. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. Hope you enjoy that. I'll see you tomorrow.